Bienvenue. Welcome once again to another property podcast. Another one, you say? Yes, this one is really quite focused. It's really talking about access and the different ways in which you can access a building to achieve particular goals. To start us off, Rob Munns, Business Development Director of BFT Mast Climbers. BFT are an organisation devoted to promoting and supplying mast climbers. We'll talk about that later. And we have in the blue corner, as it were, Martin Kurz of MSK Consultants. Sorry, I can't read my own screen. Apologies. Probably better if I put my glasses on. MSK Consultants, who is a specialist in all things to do with bricklaying and how it affects properties and how they're put up. But we'll talk more about that first of all. First of all, Rob, would you care to start us off and talk about why we're talking about this topic today?
So, I think within the construction industry, a lot of the work that I do is to understand, how and why decisions are made. And scaffolding is done very much as a default. Even yesterday, I was in a CPD with a main contractor, and they acknowledged that, look, Rob, it's not that we don't want to use mast climbers, it's just that we're not sure how or where or why. So it's about raising awareness, it's about raising and giving people the opportunity to ask the right questions to the right people. I had the pleasure of speaking to Martin about 3 years ago when I presented to the Association of Brickwork Contractors. He's a leading trainer in this area, and he sat across me at the table with a beer over a curry and just kind of said to me, it's like, Rob, everyone should be using mast climbers. I don't know why they sit with scaffolding. And that was, the early part of the conversation. So really, this is exactly that, of getting people to just stop and sit and ask that question once of why? Why are we always doing the same thing? And is there anything we can do to go and get the confidence or the answers as to why the alternative should be looked at?
I mean, I'm a vaguely educated clown prince, as people know, but even to me, it seems that the default position always seems to be, Rob, scaffolding. It's like, is there any other choice? Well, of course there is.
So it's default, and the more people that we can have in that decision process, and it's top down and bottom up. We want to have, there's many an advocate brickwork contractor out there who will turn around to a contractor and say, but I'd rather use mast climbers. Why aren't you're that? And so it's that kind of supply chain talking in both directions that we're trying to do. And I think, one of the challenges is that sometimes, the brickwork contractors, typically those who own their own scaffolding divisions, have historically turned and said, well, no, mast climbers won't work. We'd rather use scaffolding because they've got their own. We're about to try and change the conversation, challenge the norm. And really kind of just demonstrate that this isn't just a one or the other kind of style choice. There is so many significant benefits to the project and to the bricklayer's health and safety as the reasons why mast climbers should be considered. But I come from a position that I've never laid a brick in my life. I'm not the expert in doing the actual work. And that's why what I do, if I don't know if I'm not the expert, is I go out and find them and I go out and speak to them. Hence,
well, it's funny you should say that, because we've got Martin here. Thank you so much for joining the show today. Martin, it seems to me that, I don't know, there's some sort of funny business going on where some organizations have divisions beneath them that put up scaffold, and it becomes the default to just almost rubber stamp it. Well, you're going to use scaffolding, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd start off by saying, nothing's perfect. And there's situations where mast climbers aren't perfect. There's definitely situations where scaffold isn't perfect. And sometimes as a brickwork subcontractor, you have to weigh up the pros and cons and decide what's the best method. And I would always lean towards a mast climber if I could, because I'm a bricklayer by trade, and I know what I'd rather be working off of, and that's a mast climber. You're always working at the optimum height. You haven't got what we call nosebleeds. Any bricklayer in, the industry knows what a nosebleed is, when you're laying, like below your sort of feet. and you're leaning down, and you obviously have got the problems where you're overreaching. Also, with scaffolds, you have the problems of scaffolding bars being in the way, and like being able to sort of load out and get round the standards, what are the ones that go up, and the ledges are the ones that sort of go along, and all of that sort of makes the working day for a bricklayer difficult.
I'm going to start from the beginning because I need educating here. Access. From a brickwork contractor's point of view, what does good access actually mean to you?
Good access means to me to be able to get the materials, what we call get the muck and bullets, to the bricklayer, because without them, he can't fire the gun. It ultimately means being able to load out, get all the bricks where they need to be, all the mortar where it needs to be in good time. Sometimes on scaffolds, I mean, Rob has an image behind his head there of like a typical high rise, and that's got mast climbers on it. If that didn't have mast climbers on it and had scaffold on it, you would need loading bays all around that scaffold to try and localize the material delivery. Then you need a crane to operate, and the crane needs to be, in play, 8-9 hours a day solid. If the crane isn't working, if there's like wind, if there's conditions, if someone else needs the crane, you've got all of them problems with, access. It's not just you accessing the scaffold, it's you getting the materials where they need to be. And if you've basically got one bricklayer stood round for a couple of hours, it's starting to cost you money.
Right.
So that's a massive challenge with scaffold. It's still a challenge with mast climbers, but ultimately mast climbers can go to pretty much where the materials are. They can basically come down from the 10th floor to the ground floor. You try to make it work that they come down at the optimum times. So potentially you could have 4 bricklayers going to their tea break, and that might be the time to reload the mast climber. That don't necessarily work with scaffolds, So as I say, there are the issues that sometimes don't work, and I'd be a liar if I didn't mention a couple of the things with mast climbers. From my experience, from speaking to other bricky subbies and what have you, is one of the issues is on these high-rise buildings especially, they like to have fixers going ahead of the bricklayers, fixing the insulation, fixing the DPCs, fixing the support angle. And they can do that with scaffolds. They can't necessarily do that with mast climbers unless they change elevations and things. There's ways of doing it, but it does make it a little bit more difficult in them situations to work ahead of the bricklayers. So I've had subcontractors say to me that's why they don't particularly want to use mast climbers, because if they've got a scaffold and have scaffold at every level, they can go to whatever floor they want.
But by the same token, you still got the problems of getting the raw materials to them.
Oh, without a doubt. I do believe there's ways round, every problem has a solution, doesn't it? And scaffold has its problems that you can solve with a mast climber. Mast climbers have a problem you can solve with a scaffold. So what you've got to do is weigh up what is the best option. So for me, as I revert back a little bit to the absolute driver, is having people working at the optimum level. Mm-hmm. If you're laying bricks below your feet, 2 things are going to happen. You're going to lay them slower than you would at waist level, and you're not going to be able to see exactly what you're doing, which means you're going to have what's termed rough work. It's hard to point up, it's hard to rake out, it's hard to do whatever you need to do with it. When you're working at the optimum level, that is very easy. So I'm going to suggest that people, if they're laying bricks at the right level, waist high all day long versus being low, being waist high and then being high, you're going to lose potentially 30% output easily.
All right.
So there's a big bearing there, you know.
Let me just work on that for a moment. Are there other areas that brickies lose time when working on a traditional scaffold?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, one of the situations I come across very, very recently was, you know, I've mentioned that scaffolds can be pre-erected, but when scaffolds are pre-erected, they always need modifications, and that will hold up your progress as such. So if you're working on, let's say, you know, an elevation, and the bricklayers finish on that elevation, if they're on a mast climber, they can go to another elevation where there's a mast climber ready, loaded out, away they go. If they're working on a scaffold and they're finishing and they need that particular elevation, they need to carry on with that the next day or something. Now they've got a bit of an issue because the scaffold will need modifications. Back in the day, you used to work through scaffolds, and that was horrible. But that's what people used to do. You used to have hop ups and hop downs and what have you. A lot of that is being like is being sort of driven out of site situations because of the health and safety aspects of, you know, if you have a hop up and you need a guardrail. Certain main contractors won't let you use hop ups, won't let you use, you know, if you're going to use a traditional scaffold, then you have to have every lift adapted so you are not hitting your head one or trying to work through a scaffold two. You know, I had this conversation, sounds a bit funny really, but I had a conversation where we was erecting scaffolds. Internally, these scaffolds were, to be fair, but we had to work the scaffold to come to a height underneath the soffit. And I had a bricklayer who's 6'7", and I had a bricklayer who's 5'4". So how do you get the perfect height there, you know?
Well, you can't. And I suspect one of the problems with scaffolding is once you put it in, it is quite a pain to change any of the elevations. You're kind of stuck with it up to a certain point. And when you've got, as you say, people who are physically quite different in height from each other, that's quite a challenge.
Yeah, I mean,
what do brickwork consultants notice on site that main contractors often miss when it comes to access?
I think the main thing really is the distribution of materials. You know, once a scaffold's gone up, it's tied to the building, and for want of a better description, it's getting in the way. It's getting in the way of you loading out. How do you load that out? As I say, you've got to have loading bays. Sometimes you haven't got enough loading bays. Sometimes the loading bays are not in the right place. Sometimes you have to do what we say loading inside out, where you have to take the materials up onto the floors and then go out the windows. All of that is very, very labour intensive. You need sort of a X amount of labourers, hod carriers, permanently loading out, permanently sort of trying to get the materials to where they go. My experience in the right situations with a mast climber, the mast climber comes down to the floor, a forklift goes over to the mast climber, he puts the bricks exactly where they are. You could load out, you know, like 1,000 bricks on a mast climber in 20 minutes.
Right.
You can't load 1,000 bricks out on a scaffold in 2 hours.
Wow. Rob, it seems to me that there's something we need to say to the industry, to people who see mast climbers as unusual, risky, or only suitable for certain type of projects. What do you think we should be saying to them?
Well, you know, it's having the conversation. So I challenge any contractor who gives me what I call slightly generic feedback. Oh, you know, our brickies aren't particularly keen on mast climbers. Why is that? And then they kind of don't really fully understand, and it's easier for them to stick with what they've already known, and you kind of almost outsource the blame of the decision to somebody else, because internally within those contractors, if it's the PM or it's the QS or whoever making the actual decision,
Right.
The construction director, they if it feels risky to change away from a norm, especially if a contractor and a very key contractor, i.e. the brickwork contractor, the main facade, material, is potentially, questioning that, shall we say. But that's why, what we've certainly done over the last 18, 24 months is using the knowledge of people like Martin, developing better solutions for distribution, developing those kind of elements, because it now means that why encourage is put me in front of the brickwork contractor that you want to work with, so we can get the engagement. And I think the whole industry, with BSR delaying, projects significantly, it's about the early engagement. But they're not just you, because even if you haven't engaged early, it doesn't mean you can't then change from a scaffold to a mast climber kind of proposal. But I think the more you do that, you sit with the main contractor, and the points that Martin's raised that came up yesterday in the CPD, distribution, building around a corner. You probably see in the background behind me, the mast climbers wrap around a corner, and that's massively important for a bricklayer. Understanding where your movement joints are, understanding what the safe working load requirements are on a platform. All those elements are really important, and what the access providers should be having those conversations with you about, and not just give me a quote, here's a quote, okay, I'll have a look at the bottom line and I'll see how it figures. If you're not engaging and getting deeper into what does it mean, then it's not the right conversation. You really do need to engage.
Rob, well, one of your earlier points, Martin, how early should access be discussed in the planning of brickwork or brickwork package?
Well, I do believe as early as possible.
Right.
As soon. Listen, you're not going to be. Potentially, I think the discussions need to be had before the subcontractor's even been awarded the job, because I think it needs to be the main contractor deciding what is the best for the job. There's certain things that a brickwork subby will come to site and want to change, but I don't think scaffold should be one of them. That should be the decision that's made, in conversations with the subcontractors. But this is a job. Not every job lends itself to you're not going to use mast climbers on buildings that are only going up 3 floors or 4 floors. It's just the cost of it outweighs the advantage of it. So you're talking high rise, and if you're talking high rise, I think, as a main contractor and in the development stage, you need to be thinking this has got to be the methodology that we want on the job. So the earlier you can get that agreed, and if you can then prove to the bricklayer, who potentially maybe doesn't like mast climbers for whatever reason, that they're going to work, every subcontractor out there now will have had experience of both. And then, as Rob alluded to earlier, some may have had bad experiences, but we had bad experiences with silos years ago. No one wanted to use silos. Why are we using silos? Why not use mixers? Every big job in the country now, if not in the world, uses silos. There was loads of people who didn't want to use silos. You get to the stage where you think, right, we've got to use silos. It makes sense. I think the same thing really on the high rise. It's got to be the same principle as with mast climbers, because the issues, if you can like Rob said, if you can wrap around the corners, if you can find ways of pre sort of doing your installations, your DPCs, there's ways and means of doing it, because I've been on jobs where they're totally reliant on mast climbers and they find a way of doing it, like you have to find a way of, when you're using scaffold, doing modifications and that. But again, I always go back to my own personal beliefs and my own personal thought pattern, is that if I'm laying bricks, so I've got to look at it from a bricklayer's point of view, because maybe some subcontractors make the mistake of not looking at it from a bricklayer's point of view. And essentially, I think that can cost them money.
Well, look, it's been an education, Martin. These are topics I've only learnt about since I started working with Rob. Rob, would you care to take us home?
Well, yeah, I think the element there that Martin always drives, the strong message of, which has formed a big part of the conversation I now have with every main contractor, is almost not even the word access, but it's about distribution of labor and distribution of material, and your access method is how you are distributing. Now, Scaffold gives you access to anywhere at any time, but at what cost? And the cost is both time and money, because as Martin says, it's kind of, yes, you can erect it once, but you're going to have to make the many, adaptations and modifications to it. Whereas by using them for, when you look at a mast climber strategy, the distribution of labor and materials becomes far easier. You load the mast climber, you drive it to exactly where you need it on the facade, and then the labor can get, doing what they do at the right height, less risk of injury, and so forth. So for me, yeah, I think the biggest thing I've probably taken from today is distribution is probably actually almost the real key thing to start talking about. So people start thinking not just slap access up, mast climbers or scaffold, but actually the real reason why you put an access up, and that's the buildability of the job. Yeah, and if we focus on the operational element of how the project is delivered, then maybe that gets people over any hurdles that they potentially got in the way, and really kind of then think, no, actually, no, I get it now. I know how I'm going to get my labor and my materials to the right height in the safest possible way. And if they happen to save some money, doing so, then fantastic.
Brilliant. You've got to get those bullets to those guns, otherwise what's the point? Thank you so much, Rob. Excellent points, well made. And Martin, thank you for educating both of us today. And to anyone watching, I'm hoping this is strike a chord with you, but this is the first of many. Watch out, we will be consistently talking about all topics to do with access, to do with mast climbing and scaffolding. So watch out for next week. Until then, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars. And in these troubled times, please try and look after your mental health. Until next week. Bye-bye.